Um, Mr. Duncan is, I'll give a brief bio for him while we wait to get started. Mr. Russell is an American actor and a stand-up comedian known for his podcast, The Duncan Trussell Family Hour. He appears on Netflix series The Midnight Gospel and starred alongside Joe Rogan in the sci-fi series Joe Rogan Questions Everything. Um, he has lots and lots of. Oh, wait a minute, where'd it go? I got lost. I'm not having a good morning, technically wise here. There it is. He also has a podcast, and I'm trying to get my information up here.
The Duncan Trussell Family Hour.
Yes. There we go. Now I'm going to have my information back. You could give us a brief description of what you do and who you are, since I'm having such difficulty this morning.
Okay. Hi, it's so nice to meet you. I have those technical difficulties constantly. I blame it on the stars. I why not? They can't defend themselves. You got it. I'm a comedian. I made a show for Netflix called The Midnight Gospel, which is a animated show that is based on my podcast. And but mostly I'm a comedian. And the reason I'm here is because Teijo, many years ago, was my teacher at Warren Wilson College and is my first introduction to Buddhism. And I did an internship with her because I was interested in the effects of meditation on consciousness. It was really just, I didn't like taking psychology courses. That's what I got a degree in. And it was a way to get out of school and hang out at a Zen temple, which I thought was pretty cool. And so, yeah, that's pretty much it. That's why I'm here, is because I was lucky enough to cross paths with Teijo, and through that, the Dharma. And so I think she thought it would be interesting to just have a conversation around Buddhism.
And you use your Tibetan Buddhism background. You are a teacher, a spiritual teacher.
No. I work really hard to avoid that label because I have great teachers, Teijo being one of them. And I do have a great deal of respect for the, I think these days, lots of people say they're spiritual teachers. I mean, I think we're all teachers in some way or another with each other, but I do have some, maybe it's superstitious, but some reverence for the actual teachers. And I think I don't want to do any damage to anybody by laying claim to a title that would imply some deeper understanding of this stuff than I have, because I certainly don't.
Well, Duncan, we can't see you.
Oh, wait, let me turn on my video. Sorry. Hello.
There you are. Um, Now we'll go along with the more traditional way of starting these Saturday mornings talks by asking Tejo to do the opening sutra.
Are we gonna? Yeah, we need to know.
They have technical difficulties too.
I gotta make sure you know. Okay, say something. We gotta see if they can all hear you.
Hello.
Can you hear that? Okay. I wanna make sure they can hear Duncan.
Nam Myoho Renge Kyo.
Okay, let's do that one this morning. And unsurpassed, penetrating, and perfect Dharma is rarely met with even in 100,000 million. Help us having it to see and listen to, remember and accept. I vow to taste the truth of the Tathagata's teachings. Want to do Om Mani Padme Hum? what you said, Duncan, but I didn't hear you talk about that interview that we did, which is what kind of prompted this conversation. Did you talk about that?
You mean when I was asking you about the books?
No, that conversation that about 10 years ago.
Oh, our podcast.
Is that a podcast? It was a podcast.
Yes, we did a podcast. No, I just told them how you were my teacher at Warren Wilson. How you were my first real introduction to Buddhism. That's some good karma, and must have done something right in a past life. And just how lucky I feel to have made your acquaintance.
So Duncan does a podcast. You've been doing that for quite a while.
That's right.
Called Duncan Trussell Family Hour. He started a little cult, it seems like.
No. I'm too lazy to be a cult leader.
But they all come.
My
And
children.
Actually, he's made me somewhat famous because people have found me through the Duncan Trussell Family Hour. And it was a very good interview, and that is what prompted this conversation.
Great.
So I'm going to turn it over to you, since this is your line of work, is to ask questions and make conversation. We actually met a few weeks ago and had a wonderful meeting for about an hour and a half on.
Amazing.
Right, but decided that we weren't going to try and come up with a theme for this. Just do it like we did the last time, right?
That's it. I mean, I think that's the trick to podcasting, which I figured that one out. I did this very famous podcast a long time ago. Mark Maron has this incredible podcast, and I was quite intimidated. He invited me over to his house, and he's one of my favorite comedians, kind of a legendary comedian, and very neurotic, very funny, very cynical person, but I just love him to death. And I'm at his house in his kitchen, and he gives me this piercing look, and he goes, "What's your agenda here, man?" And I realized what a brilliant question that was, because the worst way to enter into a podcast is with an agenda, because if you're especially interviewing people, like if you have something you want to bring out of them, or if you have some idea of the direction it might go, then what ends up happening is you force that direction and you stop listening. And so in that stopping listening, you completely shut down all the places that you might have ended up going had you not tried to steer the ship. So whenever I go into a podcast, I try to go into it with a kind of no mind. Not to say that I use as an excuse for a while to not research guests. You research the guests, but you understand them, but you then hopefully you don't have any real agenda there, and then something might happen. Usually it does. So yeah, that's why I think it's better to not have some topic or something in mind. Which is why I want to talk about video games. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I think a cool way to start our conversation off, for those folks who aren't aware of my podcast or me, which I don't see why you would. I think the definition of fame these days has become quite watered down compared to when I was coming up. Like, fame was Jack Nicholson, or like global. Everyone knows who you are, fame. Now everyone knew. So there's so many tiny little micro audiences that people have. And I think that's what I have, and I'm happy with that. But one of my favorite moments in my, I hate to say this word, spiritual life, a big moment for me, happened when I was doing this internship at your Zen temple. And my preconceived notions about Buddhism were based, I think, mostly on movies and a fantasy that I would meet someone like you, and you would impart to me some kind of data that then I could use to, I mean, I don't think I would have used these words back then, but gain power or something, you know, like I would become wise and I would become interesting. I would become more attractive, maybe, you know, like cool. He's a Buddhist. He met. So when I met you to start this internship, the internship involved cleaning the floors of your temple. You had me clean, and you taught me a way of cleaning floors that I've used throughout my entire life. You said this is the way that they clean floors in the temples in Japan. You explained to me that they have these rice walls that are very delicate. If you hit them too hard, you could break through them potentially. And I thought that was so cool and weird and like inconvenient. Knowing me, if I lived in one of those, I would have torn many of them down. But this method of cleaning the floors is you take, and I'm sorry if many of you already know this, but you take these cloths, dip them in water, and push them across the floor with your body weight. Basically, you turn yourself into a human Swiffer, and oh my goodness, the floors are sparkling after this. And it's one of the most pragmatic things that I've taken from Buddhism. Is like, I can polish a floor. But then I remember becoming frustrated after a few of these meetings. Also, of course, you were having me meditate, and you had us sit in the lotus position, which back then was hard for me, but I could still do it. It's a little more painful these days than it was then, but at some point I remember becoming very frustrated because you were not giving me what I wanted. No books. Where's the data? And I finally said to you, aren't you going to give me a book or something? Like, isn't there something I should read or study here? And you said, what was the Buddha doing when he gained realization? And I thought about it for a second. I was like, right, he was meditating. And I've carried that with me through my whole life. Anytime I get that ferocious hunger for more information, how, down the road, I've read things about a practice, a balanced practice. I've heard the comparison between two wings of a bird. One wing of the bird, contemplation, study. The other wing of the bird, practice. That you need these two together. That you just one by itself is an imbalance. But if I was that weird bird right now, I would be like flapping around with one wing, which is I can parrot so many things. I think that's one of my talents. I can hear a thing, I can parrot it out. But the sitting part, the meditation part, Teijo, that's very difficult for me. Very difficult. And I would love to talk to you a little bit about that. The resistance, why is it hard? Why isn't this a thing that you would think it would be so easy? Sitting down. I mean, I could sit down and watch TV for hours. Why can't I sit down and watch my own mind? Did she hang up?
No, I'm here. I just don't have an answer. Sorry.
Here we go again.
I still have resistance. I talk about that all the time. And why? I don't know why.
Yeah.
Just like, I mean, I do ask that question. I ask that question of myself all the time. It's like, why is human life the way it is? I sort of agree with the way Buddhism talks about it, but just recently I was saying, but why? But it's just an unanswerable question. And I don't know why, people ask me sometimes, well, do you think you can kind of get addicted to meditation? I'm like, not me personally, because I have too much resistance, So, yeah, I don't know why the resistance, but I do know that one thing that I have discovered is that when we take one step beyond the resistance, that's awakening.
Yeah.
Because letting go is awakening,
Hmm.
right? Do you have anything to add to it?
Yeah.
The term awakening, I'm sure you know how it is. Over time, you hear these words over and over again. And you hear them initially and they somehow make sense. Awakening, that sounds good. But what are we awakening from? What is the thing we're waking up from?
Our own delusion. Right?
Yeah, and that delusion is, this is another thing. My teacher, David Nickturn, Chogyam Trungpa writes about this, but the sort of this, he talks about, like finer grades of sandpaper, sandpaper. When you're sanding something, you use finer and finer grades of it. And again, like initially, like you hear something like that, and you think, oh yeah, of course, my delusion. I'm deluded in the sense that I think ignoring my own suffering is a solution, that this is somehow alleviating the problem, or that by distracting myself from the suffering, or by blaming other people for the suffering, whatever the game is. But then, at least, and again, any correction I'd be very grateful for. But then suddenly you start realizing, well, this delusion, it seems to go deeper than that. That it's, I'm not just dealing with some kind of like surface level, obvious sort of delusion, but it appears that something about my idea of who I am in relation to everything else might be fundamentally incorrect or something. And then at some point it becomes almost unbearable to imagine this letting go, this thing. It becomes almost unbearable. You hear, what, there is suffering. The cause of suffering is attachment. You think, oh, well, that's easy, I'll just let go. But this seems more like an electric fence situation, or grabbing something that letting go of feels almost suicidal. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, I know exactly. I was talking about shunyata, which is the teaching about, it's usually called emptiness. Sometimes I call it everythingness, because really what we experience is not lack of something, but rather the completeness of life, all of life working together, and which is really what shunyata is. But actually, the actual experience of shunyata is, it feels like, we don't have anything to hold on to. It feels like we're suspended in space or in free fall or something like that. And I was talking about it. Well, actually, I was teaching a class at Warren Wilson on it, on emptiness for a while. And so I was talking about it at Zen Center, and we were discussing Nagarjuna and the various teachers about emptiness. And somebody came to talk to me, and she said, I think I've had an experience of emptiness. And it sort of feels like the bottom falls out, and she described it to me, and I said, yeah, that's an experience. And she said, well, I don't like it. And I said, okay, so why do you hate it? She says, because I don't know what's coming next.
Mm.
And she never came back. But there's a guy by the name of Shinzen Young who's studied various kinds of Buddhism. And right now I think he identifies as a Zen teacher. Well, I don't even know if he's still alive, but I heard him speak years ago. And he said that experience of shunyata is what John of the Cross describes as the dark night of the soul. And when you experience it, what you need to do is just walk into it or just step into it. And I mean, I was thinking as you were talking that actually to say to step one, take one step beyond the resistance. Actually, I think it should be to take one step into the resistance. You know, and I think that's when we experience that emptiness, that sort of free fall, like, what the hell, you know? Even asking a question like, yeah, but why do we suffer? Why do we suffer in this way? Why do we have this sense of dissatisfaction? You know, to ask that question is to want to have something to grasp onto. Again, it's dukkha itself.
Yeah.
Because who can answer this question? All we can talk about is what the experience is, you know?
Yes. Yeah. You know, I the experience of emptiness, I like to imagine I've had that, and but now these days, anytime I have some kind of epiphanous moment when I'm meditating, I get worried because I'm an addict. I get attached to that moment. I found there to be like the sort of a resonance with the descriptions of emptiness that I've read about, heard about. But then what I found to be difficult was not the emptiness as much as sort of returning or forgetting or sort of having like not just a moment of it, but you know, a month, you know, enough of a sense of, wow, I don't feel as compressed into my identity as I did before. I think I understand what they mean when they say there's a compassion and emptiness that are kind of the same thing. I could see how there would be a sense of wanting to not just alleviate yourself of all the things that go along with being self-identified, but other people too, how you could see this as some kind of, I don't know, seed of neurosis or and an antidote to that. So I did not feel, I did feel not in a sense of free fall, but just more of a sense of, I don't know, liberation or something. Went away. I blabbered about it. It was so embarrassing. I talked to my teacher about it. I over the years of meditating, I've like gotten better at not like and trumpeting out some fleeting experience that seems mystical, but this one, wow, this really seemed to be it. And told my wife about it. Then the next fight that we got in, she's like, wow, huh? You really had an awakening. Like, I didn't, all right, I didn't. I clearly didn't. So yeah, I think that, what about that suffering? The suffering of having these fleeting or false glimpses of something that you've imagined to be this or that, but when in fact it's just another delusion, another passing whatever. Yeah, great, you had some sense of emptiness, but look at you now. Look at you now. Your ego is back at the wheel, driving your car. You're defending everything all over again. What about that? That seems to be so painful, Teijo. You know, those moments of not the emptiness, but returning to the stuff.
Well, the problem isn't that the experience wasn't authentic, I don't think. I think the problem is that we somehow think we can hold on to that.
Yes. That's the heartbreak. That's it right there. You know, that's the heartbreak. This is the unbearable thing for me. I mean, I have kids, and talk about wanting to hold on to something. I mean, you know, it's like they're so beautiful and they're so, and but they're growing up. They grow. It's all the cliches that parents say. Look how quickly this situation is changing. Look how quickly time is going by. And that is so, that pisses me off. I'll be honest. That really does make me angry. I don't know who I'm angry at, but that situation is so, I know this sounds childish. It just doesn't seem fair. I mean, it wouldn't be fair to crystallize my children either as some kind of horrific infinite babies. That would make anyone who did that would be a monster. I mean, the idea that you would want to trap anyone in any kind of condition, or especially as like an infinite kid because it pleases you, is, oh, I mean, that's monstrous, but yet it's there. And I guess it's the identical mistake when you're experiencing this moment of suddenly waking up from a nightmare or something. You know, it's like that. I mean, I would say my experience with emptiness, I'm not saying my life is necessarily a nightmare, but you know, when you're in the nightmare and all of it and getting chased by the lion or whatever, and you remember, oh, I'm dreaming. Oh, it's no longer a nightmare. Now it's a really great dream. You know, and I think those moments of emptiness, that's what it was like. That's the experience for me, that kind of relief of like, oh, right.
Right. Like a little bubble, a bubble of our ideas pops.
Yes.
But I think remembering, once we've had that experience, I mean, I had some experiences like that in the monastery where I was just like one with everything, you know?
Yeah.
And then I found myself for the next 2 or 3 days, this was like during sesshin, trying to get that feeling back or trying to hold on to that experience. So it wasn't that it wasn't an authentic experience, but it was that I wanted to hold on to it, you know? And
Yeah.
so if you go down the line and say, yeah, where is that emptiness now? It's way back there because it's past experience, you know?
Yeah.
And we have to, what we learn, what Zazen can teach us, I think, is to just recognize delusion, and by recognizing it, it dissolves, it starts to go away. It doesn't have a, you know, because delusion is something like it's had a hold on us until we see it. And then when we see it, we're in charge, or we can be.
Well, let's talk about that. You know, I mean, I believe you, but, and right now things are really great in my life. Like there's harmony, everything's nice, and there's good luck, and I feel inspired. But, you know, and I recognize, oh, great, great. Now I'm attaching to this, you know, in the same way. You know, the winter was not great for me. Like I think I probably have seasonal affective disorder. Every winter I get kind of depressed and gloomy and just awful to be around. And then the spring starts coming and I get like, I start like waking up early again, making my bed. It's great. But I recognize, oh, well, now I'm attaching to this. Now I'm like allowing the conditions to be the progenitor of my great mood. And I know that this one is fleeting as well. And also I recognize whatever this, you know, temporary condition might be, it's not the same. What's the kind of like happiness I'm feeling now, it's not the same as that waking up from a nightmare feeling that came when I was meditating. It's not the same. It's more, I don't know, matter based. There's a component of greediness in it or something. There's I don't know, all the, you know, ambitious and ego gratifying. So even though intellectually I can look back to that moment and think, well, there was that. It's very similar to remembering a dream. It's all foggy now. It's kind of like, I don't know if that was anything at all. And so I can't when I place my attention on the fleeting nature of gain or loss or whatever, it doesn't seem to do what you're saying. I don't feel a dissolution. I don't feel a return to that emptiness. I just feel like a sense of like kind of failure, or like running my head against a wall or something, or throw, like that, the kind of like, well, and I don't mind that necessarily. It's just, yeah, I'm very attached to those moments of bliss that derive from a practice.
So I think though, from my experience, that yeah, when we have that kind of experience, it's like a surprise, but then it becomes it sort of integrates itself into our lives, and so it's not such a big deal anymore. It's a little more familiar, and so yeah, you don't feel it, but it doesn't mean that. I mean, the very fact that you're recognizing all these things that you're doing that you just described, to me, that's part of the awakening process. Is to just keep recognizing these things and recognizing how our mind is deceiving us.
Yeah, I think I see what you're saying now. That's really awesome. Yeah, it's kind of like that's very sweet. It's okay, grief. When my mom died, I went through the grief process. I mean, I don't know if you ever stopped going through that process, but the initial experience of grief it's wild, like sobbing fits, just brokenheartedness, just devastated. And I remember I was lucky enough to get to chat with Roshi Joan Halifax, and I was all busted up. And she said, well, just recognize a window is open in this grief. It won't stay open forever. The window closes. And when I heard her say that, all I was thinking was like, well, can I close it now? Like, let's close. I don't want this window open. This is terrible. But then, yeah, sure enough, the grief starts dissipating, or, becomes more bearable, softer. And then I found myself grieving for the grief. I wanted the grief back. The grief was making me feel connected to my mom. It was like as close as I could get to her. And when it started going away, it was like, oh, great. So now I won't even have that anymore. Now that's gone too. So I don't even get the grief. I don't even get to feel this anymore. Though it still comes back sometimes. And when it comes back now, I welcome it. But I think this is what we're talking about here is like that maybe the grief isn't really gone. It's just inundated everything. It's just become a part of your life. This is just life now. And yeah, and this emptiness or these experiences, it's not that they go anywhere. It's just that how long can you be astounded by anything? How long can you be astounded and high, intoxicated? It just becomes part of who you are. That's really cool. Thank you.
Thank you. And I was thinking about my experience of grief as you were talking about it, and I think it's not just that we're grieving the loss of that person, which we are, but I think we're also grieving our own demise. Our fear of death, because it puts impermanence right in front of us. Or I remember when my sister died suddenly, I remember coming back after her funeral and just allowing myself the time to kind of process it and not engaging in too much. And what kept coming up for me was, oh yes, this is a great opportunity to experience the impermanence of life, because like you say, it's a window. It's just a window of time that we shut down after a while when we've sort of lost our connection with this person, because of their own, they're biodegradable and they get recycled, right? So you don't have that same presence as when you were alive. So that dissipates. So we do it. And I remember after Kadagiri Roshi died, there's that period that is identified as anger in the grieving process. And how it manifested for me was that I just wouldn't bullshit anybody that would say anything. I was just like, everything just came blubbering out, however I thought of it,
Yeah.
and I really, really liked it. And I thought, oh, this is something I really got to embrace.
Yeah.
It's not gonna last.
Yeah, right.
And I think that, there's two ways of approaching emptiness, which is really what you experience when you're grieving. You're experiencing the impermanence of life, which is what emptiness is about. Things are always changing, and that we just kind of let ourselves be with it, even though we have to have some direction in our lives in order to survive. Otherwise, we wouldn't eat, we wouldn't cook, But to be able to experience that impermanence is actually a great thing, but it's also a very scary thing.
Yeah.
And so we want to run away with it, run away from it. Like you described, can't I just close this window?
Yeah.
But then we lose our connection, and then we say, oh, that's right. That was something good. And then we can't go back because we've already kind of walked away from it and entered back into that delusionary world, which says there is something I can hold on to. I had this experience when I was reading this book called The Experience of No Self by Bernadette Roberts, she was a Catholic nun that left the convent and got married and had children, and then she yearned for the contemplative life, and so she would go off, when her kids got to the point where she could leave them, and she would go off, and she had this one experience that she lost her whole sense of who she was, and it really scared her. And so she wrote 3 books about it, and the first book, she talked about it right away after she had this experience, and I was so taken with her description of it. And she kept going round and round, like, how do I understand this? How do I understand this? And then she'd spit it all out, and it would be like, oh my gosh, you got it, you understand it. But then she kept going around and around and around, and I kept telling her, don't you understand? Don't you understand? I kept talking to the book. Every time I closed the book, I was myself in a transition place. I had just come back from Sahara, and I was getting ready to go to practice period at our monastery in Minnesota. And so I didn't have time to get a job. There was only about a month. And then, but I was sort of working for a friend, and she was paying me, and I paid my rent. And I realized that I had this sense of exactly what Bernadette Roberts was talking about, feeling like, oh, I need something to hold on to. Maybe I need a real life, and not this Buddhist stuff that just kept me floating around from one monastery to another. Maybe I need a job and a car and, be a real person and like everybody else, And I realized that there were 2 options here. One was to think that I was a failure and try to grasp onto something. And the other was to recognize that this was an opportunity for infinite possibility.
Right.
A real creative moment, because I wasn't attaching to anything. And I think this is what we have to navigate in life, is this relative world that we live in, which does require some level of kind of holding on to stuff and making some kind of structure, and the ultimate reality, which is also a part of the reality in which we live. How do we bring those 2 together and find that middle path?
Yeah.
So, and we can't hold on to absolute reality, and we really can't hold on to relative reality either. But that recognition, those moments of recognition are those moments where they come together. But
Right.
how do we see it? Do we see it as failure, or do we see it as infinite possibility? That's the thing. And
Yeah.
that's where it comes back to the remembering that you mentioned.
Yeah. Well, so yeah, I'm sure you're aware of like Kerouac, the beat poets. And I can remember reading, because I always thought they were called the beat poets because, like, the beat drums, I don't know, some beatnik jazz, whatever. But I read that and maybe it meant that, but it also meant, no, we're defeated. We're beat. We're beat. And like, yeah, it's cool. It's cool. Kerouac got really into Buddhism, so many great poems about it. But so as far as the failure thing goes, I think on one level, I do align myself with that idea. I mean, if you do catch a glimpse of that thing, aren't you beat then, in the sense that if you haven't caught a glimpse of that, and if you have been entertaining the idea that maybe you're actually immortal, I entertained that idea when I was younger, before I got testicular cancer. I would kick around the idea, well, I'm the only one who knows I'm aware. I don't know everyone else. Maybe they're not aware. Like true solipsism, didn't really believe it all the way, but it's a way to delude yourself into thinking you're not going to die. Kick around the idea that just maybe this is a dream. You're not going to die. Or even worse, subscribe to some transhumanist prophecy. Well, we're going to be able to extend our lifespans, put our consciousness into a chip, whatever the thing is. All these, are mechanisms to amplify confusion surrounding mortality, probably. But so you catch a glimpse of this thing that you were mentioning, this oneness or whatever, the zillions of ways it's been described, and you're beat because you lose death. You don't lose the physical death. You're still going to die. It's not like you have that glimpse and you're now an idiot and think you're not going to die, but more along the lines of the earth stuff. It does pale in comparison to that. And that is a kind of remembering more than a discovery or something. It's not like when you encounter it, there isn't some sense of like, oh, right. Like in a dream, it's not like suddenly you freak out in the dream. You're like, wait a minute, I'm dreaming. Like, oh, right, it's a dream. So in that moment, it's defeat in a certain way. If your goal was to succeed at living forever, or getting high on the earth as much as you were, or getting high on the imaginary finish lines that you'd set up for yourself, and you're going, cross that line, that's when I'll be happy. So that is a form of defeat, I think, or failure or something. I mean, not in the negative sense, but just.
Yeah, I think there's a difference between being beat and beat down, though.
Yes, there is. Absolutely. I mean, what a relief.
Duncan, do you think maybe we should open the conversation to other people in that Zoom room?
You just did a mic drop. What you did, we call a mic drop, and you should have done a mic drop because that was amazing. Yes.
I don't know what he's talking about.
It's a trope. It's like when you say something really powerful, like stand up or wherever, it's a trope where after you say the powerful thing, you let go of your microphone. It drops to the ground, implying nothing else needs to be said.
Oh, nice. Thanks. Anybody want to say? Brooke.
Thank you, Duncan and Teijo, for this wonderful conversation. I guess one thing that came to me while you were talking, Duncan, was how you were talking about your approach to an interview, and that you like to do, you'll do the research, which is like the study part of the study wing of things, and the interview is the actual like practice, and you like to stay open during the interview. And that reminded me of something this poet, philosopher says often. He talks about, his name is David White. I don't know if anyone's heard of him, but he talks about the conversational nature of reality. And I just love that concept because it's like, you know, and then like Teijo was saying, you have like the finding that middle point between absolute reality and relative reality. And I think like practice, meditation is sort of ripe for finding, well, all life is, but meditation is, for me at least, more ripe for experiencing, not actually learning about, studying, or watching somebody else, because that's actually kind of easy, you know. Like I'm fine like watching somebody else, like, or reading somebody else talk about meditation or you know Buddhism or whatever. But when it comes to like experiencing it myself, I do also experience a great deal of resistance. And, you know, I think some of that might be laziness, some of that might be fear, you know, the fear of having this, you know, like blissful sort of like aha moment, knowing that it's not gonna last.
Or even worse, it will.
Or, oh yeah, that could be really scary too. Or like experiencing like deep pain and suffering and thinking that's going to last forever too.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's just some thoughts I had while y'all were talking. Great
Thank you.
conversation. Thank you.
Conversational nature of reality. I've never heard that before. I love it. Thank you for that. What was the philosopher's name again?
His name is David White.
David White.
White. He did study Zen Buddhism. So he incorporates that into his poetry. There's a great interview with him on Krista Tippett's On Being.
Thank you.
Yeah, he's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody want to say anything? We have three very quiet people in here. Do you want to say anything?
Yeah, I can say something. I want to say something. First off, thank you, Duncan, and thank you, Teijo, for the conversation. It was so rich, you know. As soon as like you would be talking about something, I'd be like, oh yeah, and then you know, before I had time before you know, I could really like sit with that, you know, onto the next topic. So all that is to say, yeah, there's just so much here that I want to sit with, that I'm excited to.
Thanks.
Yeah, just let sink in and process. So yeah, I don't really even know if I have any comments at this moment other than that. But I don't I mean, I just relate to a lot of what was talked about too, just the grief, the resistance. Yeah, I really appreciated all of that, and just the stepping beyond or stepping into the resistance, and all of the just the fear for me that comes up with that. Just you know, sometimes I think too of like that resistance is that for me, like knowing that everything is kind of a delusion, right, in a way, and then but like needing to also live in that. And so it's like, how do you even reconcile the two things? Like Teijo was talking about this meeting of the absolute and the relative. Like, how do we even fathom that, live that life? It's just and it's really exciting, you know. But I guess maybe I have a question, or I love the podcast. I love Midnight Gospel.
Thanks.
I was rewatching it this week. I watched the episode with Trudy Goodman. And I don't know, just anything you can and are willing to share about that, of just, I think there's so much happening, right, in the show for me. There's just like these rich, deep conversations, and then also so much like frame by frame, we were just talking about it, there's so much to look at, so much to hear, so much to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, what's up with that? Like, what
Well, I'll tell you.
Yeah, I love it. And what was your thinking? Like, what was the concept behind that?
Well, the concept, like when Pendleton came to me and said he had an idea for a way to do an animated podcast that might be interesting, we were sort of, and Netflix bought it. We knew that these, the podcast is an audio podcast and it's not for everybody. And some of the conversations are a little dense. And we're trying to make something that is going to appeal to a broader audience. So would there be a way to sort of create something where if you wanted to tune into the conversation, you could, but if you were sort of like, what are these hippies yapping about? I just want to see something cool. Then you could tune into this ridiculous, absurd, cartoony, violent landscape. In other words, if basically the idea was, look, some people are going to just be high as a kite and they want to watch something psychedelic and trip out in the colors. So let's give them that. But then, what do they say? A little bit of sugar helps the medicine go down. Not to suggest my podcast is some kind of medicine or anything like that, but Trudy is medicine for me. Like the conversations are medicine for me. The interviews with Teijo, getting to talk to some of these teachers, it's medicine for me. So the idea was, all right, let's just put some sugar on this medicine and get it out in the world. Maybe, some of the ideas some of these people are putting out there will sink in through that. That's the highfalutin idea. Also, it's just fun to come up with ridiculous situations that people are having these conversations within. That was fun. And I think there's some comedy in just that, surrounding a kind of spiritual or heady or philosophical discussion with absurd realities. Is so many funny things in that, and using some of the animation to represent symbols within the conversation itself, reflecting the conversation through the animation, but in a silly way. That's thus the frenetic animation. That's the decision. That's why we made it like that.
Thank you.
Yeah, you got it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Great meeting you.
Yeah.
Anybody else want to bring anything up?
Listening has been a real revelation. I mean, I listen to podcasts sometimes, but to see you kind of touch down into your own experience of practice and living and kind of pull it together here has been pretty amazing.
Thank you.
That you're that in touch with your history and able to see things so clearly. So thank you very much for sharing.
Thanks. Thank you.
Actually, the last time I saw Duncan in person, I think was in Hollywood.
Really?
Yeah, you picked me up and I came to one of your stand-up things.
Oh, wow. I must have blocked that out of my memory, Teijo, because it must have been terrible. In the early days, my God, I'm sorry I inflicted that upon you. I'm sure I'll incarnate as a bug for that.
Duncan, it's always nice to see you though. I was at Duncan's graduation from Warren Wilson. Yeah, and then we went out and had lunch afterwards with his mom, and I got to know your mom. You're from Hendersonville originally, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
He's a local, but now you live in Austin?
I live in Austin now. Teijo, do you remember when I ran away from you?
What?
Do you remember when I ran away from you, the sasheen? Do you remember the sasheen?
Sasheen, no, I
The
don't.
long practice You invited
I
me
know
to.
what sashimi is, yes.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, the reason I said it is like, did I get the word wrong? Yeah, you invited me to this, and it was so intense. And sitting, staring at a wall, cleaning period, rest period. Oh wow. And but then the crescendo of this thing, I don't know how, where, why this happens in the schedule, but pretty much at the perfect moment, that was the first time I heard the Heart Sutra. You were chanting the Heart Sutra, no mind, no life, no death, no. I'd been like blending in with the wall, like, all of these like wild experiences. And now suddenly the Heart Sutra, those clickers, I'll never forget it. And it was snowing outside. And I was like, okay, I'm going to go now. I got my car and I left. I ran away. I got a beer. I was just drinking the beer and like, what was that? I've never forgotten it. And I've always regretted running away. Always regretted it. Because you said to me, just stay. You can do it. Just stay a little longer. And I was like, nope. Bye. But I sure wish I'd stuck around.
Well, I don't know if I ever told you this. We got a few minutes. It took me a while before I could get brave enough to do sesshin after practicing at Minnesota Zen Center for, I was probably 5 or 6 months. It was a length of time, and Roshi was trying to get me to do it. And so anyway, I went to sesshin, and I just walked out at 3 o'clock the first day. Walked out. And so I know that feeling, because immediately the next morning I thought, oh, I want to go back, but I was too embarrassed at that point, But as you see, I eventually got back.
Yeah.
Took me several months before I could use sashimi again.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's a process, But I think if Katagiri Roshi would have realized that I was leaving, I just told the Ino and the Tenzo I'm going, and nobody seemed to care, so I left. But I think if Katagiri Roshi would have said to me, oh no, you should stay, I'm not sure that I would have left. So that's probably why I said that to you. Of course, it didn't have the same power that Katagiri Roshi would have had. Clearly.
No, it just at that point in my life, the beer had a little more power, unfortunately.
Yes, and then I started doing sesshin every month, which was offered in Minnesota. And I did that for 4 or 5 years till I went off to Kasahara. But every time I did sesshin, afterwards, my friend and I would go out and have a hot fudge sundae.
Ooh.
So I'm not a beer drinker so much, but hot fudge sundae, that'll get me. So anyway, I want to say thank you, Duncan, because we're at 11 o'clock.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you for allowing me to do this. I'm always so happy to spend time with you, Teijo. And I hope we can do a podcast together soon. And
Yes.
it is very nice to meet all of you. And I hope I see you in person someday. The next time we end up in Nashville, I would love to hang out.
Definitely. And next time I'm in Austin. So now we're going to give back the merit. May the merit of this practice
May the merit of this practice
benefit all beings
benefit all beings
and bring peace.
and bring peace.
Thank you.